Lovely. Good morning. Good morning. We've got people joining us. Hello, everyone, as you join. We're going to give it a minute or so.
How are you doing it? That'd be good to do. You can have it.
No, I don't want
Morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
Everyone is piling in. Happy sunny Thursday morning. Well, I hope it's sunny with you guys. It's definitely sunny here in Kent. Right. We're going to give it a minute or so. So if you're just arriving, don't worry, we will kick off very soon, but we're just everyone keep arriving.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Lovely. Good morning. Good morning. We'll give it till 2 minutes past and then we're going to kick off.
Do it when we start.
We will just if you can make sure you're muted, and you're very welcome to come off mute for questions and things like that, but just as people are joining, I feel like everyone's joining with sound on, so just keep an eye out for that. Lovely. Well, let's get started. I think there is enough of us here now. We are recording this, so we will be able to share this afterwards if you want to come back to it, or also if you want to share it with colleagues. And for anyone that wasn't able to make it today, enjoy the recording when you're watching it back. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Becky. I'm founder and CEO here at Reflect Digital. We are here to learn all about what you need to do about GA4. So hopefully everyone that's here knows that GA4 is happening. That's why you've turned up. But Google's announced that as of July next year, so 1st of July, Universal Analytics, which is what we're all used to using, is no longer going to be processing any data. If you're a 360 customer, there is a bit longer till 1st of October, but majority of users will be using Universal Analytics. So that means there's a real time pressure, because although this is next year, if you are not set up by the end of this month, you're going to have a problem, because in the future you will not have year-on-year data. You will not be able to look at comparisons. And although you manually might be able to do it from old GA, so Universal to GA4, you're going to be comparing apples and pears, because as Zoe's going to explain to us, things are a little bit different. So that's all I'm going to say. We've got the amazing Zoe with us today. So Zoe is our strategy director here at Reflect Digital. She is all about client roadmaps, objectives, getting ROI for clients. She's got over 15 years experience of crafting client-centric performance strategies for brands such as Adidas, Monster Energy, the World Economic Forum, and many others. So data and lead gen strategies are at the heart of what she does, along with research and performance. So analytics is absolutely key to that, because if you don't know your numbers and you can't see what's happening, you might as well be doing more traditional advertising. So I'm going to hand you over to Zoe, and at the end we'll come back for questions and yeah, to get some feedback from you. So over to you, Zoe.
Perfect. Thank you. Good morning to everyone. As Becky said, what we're going to be running through today is essentially a couple of recaps of what GA4 is. We'll cover how it compares to Google Universal, i.e. what everyone's kind of calling normal analytics, what the analytics world looks like today. We'll give you a few tips of what you should be doing about it now, as in this year, in the next couple of months. What's actually going to happen after this July 2022 and then after next year. And I'm going to highlight a few features. There is a ton of new stuff that's in GA4. We sort of ring fence this as a quite quick punchy walkthrough to give you the signposts, so you know exactly the initial actions you need to do. I'll try not to get too heavily technical today. And if anyone is interested in sort of more technical support, we can obviously take some questions towards the end. But we'll start with a very quick history lesson, looking back at the previous versions of Google Analytics. There's been probably about 4 big shifts in Google Analytics, all the way back in 2005 when they purchased Urchin and launched Google Analytics for the first time. Main features back then was just unique visitor tracking, visitor segment reporting, marketing campaign result reporting. And then 4 years after that, they launched the asynchronous version, and that just gave some additional tracking capabilities. So that was the first time you got to grips with event tracking. They started introducing things like multi-channel funnels, and real-time reporting launched. And then 5 years later, which is the world most of us have been in since then, was universal analytics. And that was when we could start playing with sort of custom dimensions. We could get pretty bespoke with our metrics. They started first rolling out attribution reporting, which wasn't necessarily great when it first launched out. And they had the new measurement protocol. So that brings us all the way up to sort of GA4. That's bringing with it the latest in Google's machine learning. It's also tackling the new privacy-centric tracking. And there's now automatic and combined web and app tracking all rolled up into one. So that's kind of the life cycle of where we've gotten to. But to try and explain what GA4 actually is, simply put, it's the next generation. So it's cross-platform, it's cross-device tracking, and it's where all of your data is now unified into that one central location, which will be your new GA4 property. So within that new Google Analytics property, you can set up data streams from any or all of your sources now in one place. So that would include anything iOS, anything Android, as well as your website, any data that you might have sitting in apps that you might have up and running, all rolled up into one. Now, according to Google, they say they see the main goal of this new Google Analytics 4 as providing a complete understanding. They're trying to give you a completely holistic view of the digital experience of one of your users across the sort of digital landscape. It's an expansion of their old Google Analytics app and web property. So that used to be known as Google App plus Web. But now it operates, as I've said, across all of those platforms. It also doesn't solely rely on cookies anymore. And one of the big talking points is that it no longer stores IP addresses. So it's now sort of for the first time really helping brands stay on the right side of those ever-evolving privacy regulations. So you can be sure that you're sort of being completely considered towards data protection and data privacy. In terms of how it actually compares and stacks up against what you might be used to, your sort of Google Universal, it's essentially giving you more data. So Universal uses session-based models to collect and report on data. That means that any user interaction that comes to your site, they're all grouped within a given time frame. So once they've left that time frame, they've left the site, you lose any sort of visibility of it. GA4 is much more flexible because it's offering what they call an event-based model. What that means is it allows for more accurate reporting, and it means more information can actually be passed into that Google Analytics property. I'm going to trip over that word multiple times probably, but it handles much more being passed into the Google Analytics property with every interaction. So that means that there can be a value for things like purchase, page title, user location, all attributed into that one sort of handover of data. And in this model, every single user interaction is a standalone event. So it's no longer ring-fenced within a session. That means you can send up to 25 additional event parameters with every single event that you send to GA4. Currently, Universal only allows 4: category, action, label, and value. So you can now have a maximum of 500 currently, although everyone is talking about the fact that they're probably going to keep extending that. But at the moment, there's a maximum of 500 distinctly named events that you can send into GA4, which is obviously giving you a much wider set of data that you can monitor your engagement with. One of the other big changes is in goals. So in goals, which was what we're all sort of used to in Universal Analytics, those are now all called conversions in GA4. In the free version of Google Analytics, UA was allowing a sort of maximum of 20 goals, but this has now been extended in the new property to 30 conversions. Goal setup also differs now in both. So Universal allowed goals to be based on duration, destination, events. You could set up a custom setup like an event category, for example, whereas GA4 is only allowing conversions that are based on events. So what that means is that any page view goal will need to be set as an event to GA4 before it can then be used as a conversion. This is again reinforcing that thing that Becky was speaking about around really needing to start setting up your GA4 alongside your existing Google Analytics account to make sure that that slight change, that nuance in the way events are set up to turn into conversions is going to give you the single joined up view of your data. GA4, you'll hear this being spoken about a lot across digital. It is all about events now. So all user engagement now gets categorized as a digital event, and your goals, as I've said, are replaced with conversions. So what it means is you now have to stand back and work out which events you want to track, and then which actions do you want to then count as a conversion. The nice trick, though, is they have built a very useful events menu for you. So when you're creating things, it does try and give you a sort of a slightly WYSIWYG approach to building it. You can create a new event, you can edit an existing one, and then what you'll see in your Google Analytics 4 property is sliders, once you've created each of those events, that allow you to then tick, I also want this to show up and track as a conversion. So for example, you can name an event page location and then add the specific name of the page you're measuring as a bit of a condition. And those are a couple of examples on the screen there of what that looks like. But ultimately, there's a lot different, but it really boils down to these 4 key things. Universal Analytics relies on tracking cookies. That's obviously increasingly limited by browser security settings, by the operating systems, and by ad blockers that users are continually starting to deploy for their digital experience. GA4, it's less dependent on cookies. So it's obviously much more user-friendly in terms of privacy controls that are built in. It means you can be 100% safe that you're being compliant with GDPR, with the CCPA, and probably whatever future regulations might evolve from those privacy protections that we're seeing. Universal Analytics primarily focused on sessions, as in visits to a website, and we were typically looking at page views to help marketers understand how visitors were engaging with your site. Now, in GA4 world, it's recording every single interaction. So that includes all your session starts and page views as separate events, which means you're getting far more granular user-centric measurement that's actually showing you the behavior of how people are engaging with the site. Privacy measures, things like opt-outs, regulatory compliance, they've created really large gaps in UA tracking, which is why that was kind of starting to muddy the water for people. It meant people weren't sure, could they trust the data? People were getting, users were getting, very cagey about how much data someone could see. And so what Google's done with GA4 was try and close the gap. What they've also done with the best of their machine learning is looking at how to help marketers with modeling predicted user behavior. I'll get on to more of that in a moment, but ultimately that's the new platform or the new property is helping you to paint a much more clear picture of things like your conversions, your attribution, your user segmentation. UA's reporting was also pretty basic. You often had your sort of charting options and you had to really be quite au fait with more advanced features to try and get the best report that you would want. Whereas with GA4, all of their advanced analysis tools are for free. So you can now see full pathing, you can do big query exports if you're trying to really mine and dig into to see data. So you get much more tangible, sort of actionable hands on the data so you know what you can do with it all. So what should you be doing about it? Now, Becky has sort of largely alluded to this in the intro, but ultimately you need to start moving away from the old way of analytics, preferably to the new one before the end of July this year. Why you need to do this now, there's lots of reasons. Ultimately, these are some of the sort of motivating ones if you're feeling a little bit hesitant. If you've got an app, or you might be developing one, you don't really have any choice but to concede to GA4 now, since that is the sort of dominant way of collecting analytics. But even if you don't have an app, even if you're just purely looking at your website, GA4 is really all about future-proofing your web platform. It's future-proofing your data regulations. It's future-proofing the granularity of the user data you want to see. And if you start doing your transitions now, you're going to be able to capture more historical data into that property before the migration is actually forced. So you'll be able to build a multi-year look-back window of your data. And the sooner you do it, the sooner you can sort of stop flipping back between your universal and your new GA4 property to stick your reports together.
No.
I think someone might have joined or come off mute, but I'll keep going. The bonus is if you do create an app now, or you're going to be rolling one out, you've automatically got that stream flowing into your GA4, and you'll have obviously get much more comfortable with understanding how the reports work in advance before the sort of formal shift happens. So looking at the timeline, as Becky mentioned, there's a ticking timeline here, so it's best to sort of get started sooner rather than later. Google itself is recommending that you get your GA4 account created and start doing something called dual tagging, which I'll explain in a moment, by end of July this year, in order to give you that historic tracking and to make sure there's that sufficient sort of transfer or transition of data between the two properties. What happens at the cutoff point is Universal Analytics will actually stop processing new hits. As Becky mentioned, though, the 360 properties, there's a bit of a lag there. They'll stop on the 1st of October. Historical data, we reckon, will still remain available. It won't track anything new, but you'll have a look back, a look back window of about 6 months. But many in the space are interpreting it to mean that Google is going to be deleting all Universal Analytics data by December 2023. We don't know that for sure, but it is obviously best to make sure you're getting that data back up and transfer in case that is the case, in case that does happen. Perfect. So why you need to start the transition, sort of all Universal Analytics properties need to be upgraded to GA4. If you previously had a Firebase Analytics account, which you might have had, if you've got a historical app, that's automatically getting upgraded. So that's sort of taking care of itself slightly. And if you've started anything currently now, you will already likely be in GA4 world anyway. But in terms of your new GA4 property, anything new that you've created, you're all right, because it will automatically be GA4. As we've mentioned, anything with the old version of GA, Universal Analytics is going to be depreciated. So you can set it up, obviously, yourself, if you have an app or a website or both. And as we've said, you really must set it up whilst you've still got your existing accounts to give you that time to see your data between the two. And what I mentioned before is dual tagging. So this is the practice for implementing Google Analytics on your site before the forced migration. And it literally means you are trying to mirror whatever your tracking setup is currently within Universal Analytics. You're making sure that all of those tags have been mirrored across into GA4 so that you're essentially running both tags in their correct properties to give you that historical data reference. If you've got a relatively simple setup, you can upgrade to GA4 by just clicking. There's a very handy little GA4 setup assistant in your Universal Analytics property settings now that Google's released, which will try and walk you through some of the basic setups to make sure you've got those tags, and you need to obviously make sure you've got your corresponding tags for GTM as well. So a couple of quick how-to tips here of if anyone is needing a bit more technical of how you go about adding that via Google Tag Manager. You'll need to start creating your GA4 configuration tag, which is very similar to your page view tag that you might be used to in Universal Analytics. At that point, you can feel free to add any of the fields you're sort of confident with to set your user properties. Anyone who's very confident in this space can obviously use advanced settings if you need to customize the tag in GTM. Things like your global settings variable for Universal Analytics tag, you can do all of that. And it should have the configuration you want for the events and page views alike, so that all of your GA4 event tags reference that configuration tag that you've created. What you would need to do is enter the measurement ID that you will have gotten from the analytics. And then just like you would normally do, you set it to fire. So you set the trigger to fire on all your pages and you hit publish. You've now sort of mirrored your event tag with the measurement ID from analytics, and you've now got one generic dual tag for your website. You can also add JTAG.gs directly to the page instead of going through Google Tag Manager. Normally, you'll need a sort of tame developer to help you do that. You can do it via JavaScript, or you can do it via the full property configuration. But again, this is where there's a bit of complexity. So if you're not hugely confident or doing this yourself, refer it to your development team or to your partner agency that can help you do this to make sure that you do it properly, because there is a bit of configuration to make sure that those event tags fire and mirror and are set up properly for dual tagging. Okay, so just to recap, what happens next year is just everything then stops. So a reminder of why we're suggesting this is to make sure that you get that historical data that you've got at least a full year back window whilst you're doing this sort of merge of the way events were tracked in old world versus the way you want to see your events and conversions showing up in your GA4 property. Ooh. Come on. There we go. So those are the key points for you to see, is the July, then October, and then probably by January, they are more likely to be deleting data. If you're nervous about anything, if you're wanting that real sort of extra security blanket, then a pro tip would be to export your BigQuery. For anyone who doesn't know BigQuery, it's like a big data warehouse. So you can back up and store all of your historical Google Analytics data. You can also use Funnel.io as another one, but it basically just helps you control ownership over your Google Analytics data overall. So if you're not sure how fast you're going to get your dual tagging set up to give you that year look back window, you can just sort of do a big export if you'd like to data query, but it would be much better to make sure you've gone through the rigmarole of getting your dual tagging set up. So a lot of that technical stuff might be slightly overwhelming, but there are some really exciting, beautiful features that you can get excited about in GA4. And one of the first ones to probably get excited about is the enhanced measurement. GA4 was made the most tracking available sort of out of the box, so there's little to no configuration required. There's some of these really very handy enhanced measurement settings, which, as you can see, they're pretty easy to toggle on and off as a sort of quick initial start to start getting your handle on some of the key things. And there's quite a long list, which this is obviously just a screenshot. You can scroll down and sort of toggle on and toggle off some of the enhanced measurement features that they've released into GA4. One of the big solves that GA4 has given us is cross-domain tracking. So that's no longer as problematic as it's been. With cross-device reporting, you're obviously going to have a much more detailed look into your customer experience across platforms. So whether they might be visiting on a mobile device or a computer or a tablet, you can now see it all within your GA4, how people are interacting with the brand, and start to actually strategize that user journey all the way through across domain and across device. And then the big one as well is it's bringing forth the latest in Google's artificial intelligence. You'll see that there are these suggested audience predictions. This takes a look at target segments. It's using the artificial intelligence to make informed assumptions about things like likelihood to purchase, potential churn. It even provides you with a potential revenue forecast that a specific customer segment could produce for the business. And obviously, these are really lovely areas to dip into to try and plan your next move, or to determine maybe a new campaign that you want to test to see whether you can elevate ROI. So this kind of data lets you know perhaps which audience you should really focus on, which audience might likely respond to your online campaign the most. And it's a very helpful tool to kind of get a feel for where to invest your time and your energy and your resources to get the best return. So this is a really nice feature, and they are investing an awful lot of attention in this at sort of the Google developers. So it's likely to keep enhancing and keep getting better and better. Google data streams are another example of how Google sort of tried to answer the previous challenge of fragmented data collection. So the data streams section that you'll see in GA4 is designed to consolidate all properties into one login. So you can see everything to do with your websites or your apps or your multiple domains. Within UA, you usually had to set these all up as separate properties. But here, data streams brings them all together to create a roll-up property. And you can customize that with up to about 50 different dimensions and 50 different metrics, along with, I think it's 25 now registered user properties that can be rolled up into that single property. So again, it's a really lovely tool to aggregate data, to give you that kind of zoomed out view on everything that might be happening cross-domain. It doesn't mean you can't still break it down into individual streams, of course, but it's a real excellent view to get comfortable with, to look at overall audience engagement. It's much more holistic. It's far more robust in how to track unique users across platforms. So that's a very nice one to go and have a look at. And then generally stuff looks sexier. They have sort of spent quite a bit of time to try and make the data visualization a lot better. The new features that they're introducing through GA4 are designed to use first-party data to give you those richer insights, to give you much more detailed user journeys. And as a result, the way they've restructured and organized reporting has been optimized to be as customizable and user-friendly as possible. So it's pretty intuitive. You can find the marketing insights you want based on the part of the user journey you're interested in. So you can see, for example, what channels are driving new customers in the new user acquisition report. You can use the engagement and retention reports, which are combined to understand what actions that customer set is likely to take and whether they're likely to stick around after converting. And the more comprehensive integration that's happened as well with Google Ads means you can create much more relevant sort of conversion boosting experiences by looking into those insights. Being able to add up your app, your web, any other interactions is going to really give you that combined impact of your marketing. And having that sort of increasingly accurate, detailed historical data moving forward is going to make your long-term planning and strategizing much, much more effective with these kind of data visualization tools that you can unpack in GA4, which was rather limited before in Universal Analytics. So a couple of key takeaways to remember. Goals have been replaced by conversions. GA4 is a new event-based data model that measures user-centric data rather than just sessions. It no longer relies on cookies, so we don't have to be scared with the cookieless world that's coming. Means it's future-proof. It's designed to adjust to upcoming changes in data privacy. You've also got less risk of spam referrals. So GA4 has forced a new measurement protocol. It actually includes a little secret key that's visible in the GA4 web data stream settings, but it's not available publicly. So only hits that are transferring that data key can send data. So you have less risk of things like bots and spam traffic, spiking and making a mess of your analytics. You can build really custom reports around the life cycle. It also offers complex domain tracking out of the box, so you don't have to worry about workarounds or complex coding backend issues. It's got some really sexy built-in machine learning modeling. You can set up alerts, you can set up custom insight reports. And as a result, it's obviously giving you greater visualization overall, but particularly in the cross-device journey. And you're obviously getting the sort of marry through with deeper audience integration and your Google Ads results all at the same time, which is great. So there's a lot to be really excited about. You've just got to go through the slight effort of making sure you've got that dual tagging set up really at the moment. But ultimately, it means you should really start loving data. You should really be able to get your hands and teeth into fantastic data. With the data model that's driving the sort of key differences between the two platforms, transitioning to GA4 isn't just about upgrading. It's not just about sort of evolving the way you use data. It is a brand new way of collecting and analyzing data. So if you start planning now and sort of activating that migration, you're really going to ramp up your team skill and knowledge in terms of how to action the best digital strategies possible. And hopefully, I think you'll hear from Dasha if we haven't chatted before. I think if you are one of our partners, you'll hear from Ayala. Or if you're one of our clients that's joined us today, one of our account managers will also be sending you all of these key takeaways from today's session. And I think, Becky, we've also got some ways that we can help people if they need to reach out as well.
Yes, definitely. Yes. And thank you so much, Zoe. There's so much, isn't there? I'm excited about the possibilities. But yeah, it does feel a bit overwhelming, doesn't it?
Yeah, it can be. As I said, there are some really easy toggle on and toggle off, but if you're a customer who's got a massively complex website, then that's why you need to start now. It is going to take a little bit of time to sort of do this transition. If your analytics is in a bad shape now, as in if you don't think that you've already got your tracking set up and your attribution modeling is in a bit of a mess, then this is a really good opportunity to actually sort of tidy your house and really get your hands on data that can be useful, can support your marketing, can really sort of inform your strategy. So I'd really encourage people, don't be scared of GA4. There's some really beautiful, exciting stuff that's going to help you. So get comfortable with GA4 now. The more time you spend getting comfortable with it, the easier that final transition point will feel.
Well, and I think that's the key thing, isn't it? You've got a couple of weeks to get it set up, but then you've got a year to get comfortable and to, because also I think especially like most people on this call, I'm sure there's somebody else that you report metrics to, and actually you need to take them on a journey as well, because as you're learning what the differences are, you need to educate them, because you're going to be talking about slightly different metrics and looking at things differently to how you've been able to look at them before. So what you don't want to do is come to next July and be like, oh no, now I need to stop talking in this different way, and my boss is expecting me to report on this number and I can't find that number anymore, it's a different number and it's not comparable. So I think that's the there's time, which is good, but it does rely on getting moving now, and then carving out time to look at the differences. So yeah, and as Zoe said, we will be sending you, so there's some QR codes on screen here, we're going to be sending you we can send you a recording of today. You're able to get hold of the slides from today. We're also going to be sending out an offer for if you need help. We don't want this to be overly salesy. The most important thing is that you do something. I don't mind how you do it. If you can do it yourself, if you've got an agency that can help you, or if we can help you, but the most important thing is you do something. So we thought we'd make it easy, and we've just put some packages together of how we might be able to help. But the most important thing from today is that you feel that you know a bit more about it and you're able to go away and do something. So with that in mind, I think we'll jump on to questions. So, and we can probably stop sharing the screen in a second so we can see faces more. Oh, sorry, Zoe.
No, that's fine. I just have to find my mouse. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much. Lovely assistant on site.
Has anyone got questions? You can either pop your hand up, you can pop it in the chat, you can come off mute, you can, whatever you're comfortable with, but we'd love to hear from you. I'm gonna, while people are thinking of questions, I'm gonna just start with, like, Zoe, is there one thing that you're most excited about with GA4?
I'm a data nut, so the reporting that you can really see now, and Google's made it really intuitive. I think for a lot of people, I remember starting in Google Analytics years ago, and it used to feel like quite cumbersome trying to figure out, like, how do I put the right dimensions or the right metrics to actually try and make sure I'm getting the slice of the data sample that Universal Analytics was giving me to give me the right information. Whereas with GA4, particularly with the predictive modeling and the new artificial intelligence learning, it's doing an awful lot of that hard work for you. So once you've figured out what data you want to see and what sort of report structures are the best, there's some really rich reporting, particularly looking at things like predictive churn, forecasts of, if you're an e-commerce client, the forecast modeling is incredible because you can really sort of start testing and looking at different aspects of reporting. So I think the data visualization is just so much better. And the artificial intelligence aspect means you're really getting that optimum sort of Google machine learning stuff delivered to you through your GA4 property, which is fantastic.
And if you've done a good setup, is the visualization of the customer journey better? Because I know that's, for me, that's been a frustration.
Yeah, no, the funnel and the journey mapping is fantastic. And I think what used to be a real battle before was attribution modeling always seemed like an absolute pain in the arse to get right. And largely because if you were not if you were interested in first click, which might not even be on your website, then you also had the added bugbear of cross-domain tracking that never worked. So you weren't sort of trying to get 100% cemented view of what was happening. Whereas now they've solved the cross-domain tracking, means you don't have to be so worried about first or last click attribution modeling, because you can now just actually, attribute the entire user journey flow to a point. So yeah, it's a lot more intuitive. It's sort of already built in to operate that way, whereas it used to feel a bit like a workaround. So doing things like funneling, drop-offs, doing better attribution, journey modeling, all of that is far, far more streamlined and seamless in GA4.
Amazing. And I've had a question come in from Jordan. So we have got, when comparing data side by side, there are some visible discrepancies in the way data is tracked. How would you go about explaining that to a customer?
The best way I can say is that, and this could be, slightly controversial, it's often if they haven't got a very tidy setup in their Google Tag Manager or their current Universal Analytics already. There is also likely to be a bit of discrepancy depending on how quickly you've done the shift. So if you've only just done your dual tagging, it almost takes a little while to sort of balance itself out. The longer, and if you look at your GA4 property as I am now going to treat this as my ideal world. So in some cases, to do the quick win, you're just going to mirror and do your dual tagging setup and go, right, everything's tracked, it's fine. In another way of looking at it, what you want to be doing is then actually enhancing and looking at how you're building your tracking properly. So again, looking at things that you want to track as events, looking at things you then want to track as conversions, because remember, this is now all event-based, so it's not going to track conversions the same way that it did in GA4. And so you need to sort of make sure you're joining up the logical dot to dot in the data rather than just assuming you're going to get like for like. The data is sitting there, but the way you build your event tags and the way you build your conversions is different in GA4, and that can be a slightly nuanced thing. So if you haven't quite cracked that, you can wind up with a little bit of a, well, I was seeing 10 conversions in my one world, now I'm only seeing 5, where did the others go? It's usually because there's a slight error in the way that logic has been set up with the understanding of events and the need to then track them as conversions. So I would always suggest look at how you've set them up and understand the logic of what do you want to track as an event versus what do you want to track as a conversion, and then build that world correctly in GA4.
Perfect. And also, I suppose, you can bring the customer back to reality of, if we go back to the dates that Zoe shared earlier, Universal Analytics was built in 2014. It's really old tech. Like, yes, they've been kind of adding to it, but the reason they've started again is because they needed to start again. So actually, some of the data will just genuinely be different because they've got better ways of measuring it. So actually, I would be selling it to a client that what we're looking at here is more accurate. It might be recorded slightly differently, but that's also based on the different world that we now live in and how we want to look at websites. So I think it's having that time, instead of having a month where you go, last month we were Universal, this month we're GA4. I think it's taking them on a bit of a journey over a couple of months and easing them away from Universal and easing them into new metrics and new numbers. And then hopefully at that point they won't want to look back because they'll be happy with where they're going. But I think, yeah, it's just understanding that it is probably more accurate, but it is also looking at things slightly differently.
But one of the other things to be aware of is, if anyone, I have heard a few discussions in forums recently where people have done the shift and they've in GA4, it looks like their traffic's gone down. That can happen. And the reason why is, again, because GA4 has improved the sort of security features, means you do not have as much risk. You've got almost zero risk of spam traffic hitting a site, as in those bots that you would see a site getting attacked by, spam traffic, and traffic would sort of be unrealistically spiked. The fact that they've cut all of that out, if it's not passing that security key, means you could see a slight dip because maybe you're not getting as much sort of crap spam traffic landing on the site as well. So there are aspects like that. But to Becky's point, this is exactly why we suggest dual tagging. This is exactly why we suggest it is a transition. It's not you switch from one to the other. It does mean you're going to go through probably 2 or 3 months of looking at two things and sort of starting to be more and more comfortable with GA4. And the minute you're comfortable with GA4, you can stop flipping between the two properties, but it is a transition. How much time will it take to set up dual tagging? And oh gosh, I can't answer that because I don't think there's such a thing as an average website. If a website's got only 3 pages and it's only tracking 4 buttons, then it can take a day. If you've got a massive sort of complex Google Tag Manager setup and you've got multiple different events, then it can take a bit of time. Depending on how expert or experienced you are, I would certainly suggest at least allow yourself a week to figure out how you want to measure and track, where you need your sort of mirrored dual tags to be set up, either deciding to do it in GTM or directly in your GA. It's certainly not something you just quickly do in an afternoon. You do need to invest a couple of days to make sure that you do it correctly and properly. So yeah, it's not really the ideal answer, but I would say give yourself a week to slowly and carefully get it done without tripping yourself up too badly.
Yeah, and I would say the planning, because you still only have those 30 conversions. So planning really what do you think you want, and thinking about your own strategy and the future of your strategy as well. And if there's things that that are coming that you're going to want to be able to track in the future, just trying to plan that in so that you're going to give yourself the most robust option.
Yeah, 100%.
Any other questions? They were the last ones in the chat. Has anyone else got anything else? You can pop your hand up if you do. No, I think we're done. So thank you all so much. As I said, we're going to send you the follow-up bits. We are going to quickly